Alrighty, so next up is I wanted to talk about rendering out a final little turntable for your character, right? Because that character's gonna be spinning around, you know. And something that I think would be nice for this is turning off our renderer, right? So if your render's going on there, make sure you just pause it. You can close down that Arnold render view once your lights are perfect, right? So I have that sky dome in my background, and I have the just another Arnold light. It's an area light. I changed it. Remember, whenever you make a light, up that samples to like about 3, depending on how close it is to cam. And I'm always cranking up that exposure. This depends on your scene size. Like if you have a bigger scene, like this guy's like big in Maya's internal sort of metrics, right? So then I have to crank up the exposure a lot. Past 5, like it maxes out at 5 by default, but I just enter in my own exposure. And yeah, so yeah, make sure you just get your lighting to say something about that character, you know. Like you could change the color and make it like moody. You can make it like a little bit red to signify danger or something. But yeah, so that's that. And then let's open up. I'm just holding space, and then I'm going to the outliner. So you have this character. Now you could put him on like a platform or something, or like a disc if you'd like. So like something like this. Feel free to do whatever, you know. Let me just make a little platform for him to be on. There we go. And ideally, like, you'd have something that suits the character rather than just like a regular default platform, but I'm not going to require that, you know. Like this is all about getting a nice little presentation, you know. And then if I wanted all of these to be a little bit stronger, I could go into edge mode, and I could select bevel edge. I'm just holding shift and right click to do that, and let's add some segments there, and let's reduce the fraction. There we go. So now we have a nice sharp pedestal for him to be on. And I want a turntable of this guy, right? So we have 2 options. You could rotate your camera around the character like this, you know. I prefer just rotating the character though, because it's just a little bit simpler. So select the group that's above your character, or if it's rigged, select the main control at the feet and do these next steps with it, right? Of setting the keys. But for that first key, right, just go to that group. If you don't have a group and it's like you just have a bunch of empty meshes like this, just select them all and then press Control G or Command G to group them, and you'll get a nice group like this that you can then spin. So first step, go to frame 1 with that main group selected, or if it's a rigged character, select the main control, go to frame 1, press S. Right, there you go. So see that fat key on the timeline? That is perfect. That's what we want. Next step, let's go to frame like 140. So I'm just typing 140 into my bar right there. And then I'm going to rotate Y, and I'm going to type 360. Why? Because we have 360 degrees in a circle, right? And I'm going to press S again, especially if I don't have auto key on enabled. And there you go. So now my character's spinning. So you can, if you press the timeline, you'll see that it's playing. Make sure you're at the correct frame rate right there, and then right click your timeline and do playback speed real time to make sure you're seeing exactly what you're wanting. And if you have Arnold render view open and like press play, you'd see that it's spinning there as well. And yeah, I like spinning the character because then our lighting is going to be like, we've polished our lighting for this sort of camera angle, right, from this direction. So if you mess with that lighting too much, then like, or if you spin the camera around, then you might see like unappealing lighting in from some angles, you know. So we want to prevent that, right? So that's why I'm spinning the character. And I'm not liking this disc. Let's just remove that, and then I'm just going to pull this down. There you go. But yeah, Awesome. So next up, we need to render out a sequence, right? First things first, though, I want to use my resolution gate. It's these two buttons. Make sure that they're highlighted so you can see exactly what you're going to render out. It's the inside of this gray box. You want to make sure that that's looking good, right? So that's first step. Arnold renderer, open up that Arnold render view, press play to make sure you're rendering like what you want to, like what you make sure that it's like exactly like what you're intending to show. And this is great. I'm liking this. So I'm very happy with that. So next up, before you render, make sure you go through all your lights and up the light samples, go to the shape of it, samples, make sure that's 3, right? Make sure that's 3. Same with any other light in there. Simply because if you up the samples on those lights, it will slow down the render, but you'll get a lot better quality. It won't be as fuzzy, and then it makes your render time a little bit lower in the long run. Because if I go to Windows, rendering editors, render settings, boom, here's all of our common settings, right? So if you're doing some compositing or denoising or something, then you might have to click some of these, but and be in the EXR format. Or if you're doing like nuke sort of stuff afterwards, use an EXR and get some AOVs. But that's beyond the scope of this. For our purposes, I'm just gonna call this like King Turntable. Right, there we go. And I'm going to use a PNG because it's not going to be too, I don't need it to be too extreme, right? So, and open up your render view. Notice that my background's darker. The reason that is a little bit darker is because I selected it in here, and then I went to this little slider and I slid it down a little bit. So if you do 0, that background doesn't show up at all. If you do 1, it's going to be completely bright like it is in this viewport. But I like it kind of sitting in the background, you know. I want it to be a dull sort of color back there, you know. So there's that, and then let's look at, so we have PNG, right? Notice that my options down here got reduced. Next option that's incredibly important, frame animation extension. We want name number.ext. Make sure that you don't have any other numbers in your like scene, like in the prefix name, because when we bring that into Premiere, it's going to be looking for those numbers, right? So, and I might just open up Premiere right now so it doesn't take ages when we get to that section. Next up is, after you have that, make sure frame range is perfect, right? So if you have multiple camera angles in your scene, like say your first opening shot only goes from frames 1 to 40, then you type end frame 40 right there, and it'll stop rendering that camera at frame 40, right? Ours is 140 because I'm just doing one spin, so it's going to be 140 frames of that. So I'm going to type in 1 and 140. And then renderable camera, this is mostly if you're doing like the batch render. Just make sure it's the correct camera right there. It doesn't matter that much because we're going to do render sequence, and you can specify a different camera in that window. Next up, very important, HD, you want to do 1080, right? If you're going for a higher resolution, you can type in custom and then get your own resolution in there. Or if you want to render out at a different sort of like a square or something, then you can absolutely use one of these, like 1K, 2K, 3K squares. And then yeah, so 1080 is just 1920 by 1080. You know, that's the aspect ratio. That's what your resolution gate is looking at when it makes that gray box. And next up, in Arnold renderer, mine are completely messed up, right? They're way different than what you're seeing. You'll see 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 across the board, right? Now, the reason that I'm cranking some of those up is because the bounce lighting from some of those diffuse rays gets a little bit choppy in sections. So I did something like this, and it gets a little bit nicer. You'd have to go way higher to get like a perfect render, you know. And the biggest thing to note though is that the camera AA value, if you crank that up to like 4, it's going to be a lot smoother, but it's really multiplicative on your render time. So something that would take like 5 seconds to render at 2, if you crank it up to 4, it's going to take like, potentially like minutes, right, to render that out, right? So it just takes a lot longer per image. That's why I downgraded mine to 2, and then I'm upgrading my other channels. And then these channels I didn't need at all because I don't have like a glass in my scene for transmission, or like a clay-like surface for subsurface scattering. No like thin paper or anything like that. So that this is just, I would leave it at the default of 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then with your samples in your lights, you're gonna get some decent results. You'll get a little bit of spottiness, but that's fine. For our purposes. Next up is in your AOVs. You don't need to worry about this at all, but this is just if you're looking forward in the future. If you're doing stuff with like Nuke for compositing or something, you can put in specific layers essentially into that render, into your EXR. I'm gonna unclick that into your EXR, and then you can bring that into your video editing program and affect those channels specifically. So I could put this light, this rim light that I put in from the back, I could have that render on a specific AOV and then plug that into my final compositing software and like add some bloom to it or something, or dull it down if it's too strong, so you can do crazy stuff with that. That is if you're actually a compositor, but for our purposes, just make it 3 in camera AA, 2 in all of these other channels, and you'll be good. And then King Turntable render, boom. There you go, just making sure. There you go, so that's set up, right? Next up is Windows. We're going to, not Windows. Make sure you go to the rendering menu here, right here, and then do render and render sequence, and make sure this is the correct camera, right? And make sure this is the correct frame range, right? See, it's cool that it gives you both there, and specify a different file output location. So mine's in my images folder, but I'm gonna also go and create a new folder and just call this Turntable render. And then next up, I'm gonna select that, and that's my new folder, right? And finally, I'm gonna render sequence and close, and it's gonna output all those files, right? I, however, am going to really downgrade the quality here, right? So I'm going to make it so this renders out really fast. I'm just gonna go down to camera AA 0, boom, and then let's just watch the speed at which it renders this out, right? So it's going, and it's going through all those. Boom. There you go. And it's done. And that took 15 seconds, right? Next up, don't do this. Don't do this. I'm just doing this so we can see it faster. I'm going to go down to 540 quality, right? Because I'm not going to have that in the video, And that took 4 seconds to render out, right? Let's just crank these channels down. Boom, 2 seconds. Perfect, right? So don't do those final steps. Keep your camera AA at 3 and keep all these other ones at 2, and you'll get some decent results. But for my purposes of this video, I just want to render in real time, and then I'm going to do render sequence, and they're going to be output into that turntable. I'm going to do render sequence and close, right? So now, when you click that button, this is when you can go to sleep, right? You can just straight up go, not worry about anything, and let the computer do the work for you, right? That is, it's fantastic, right? Because the computer is going to be rendering all that overnight. Make sure you have some sort of screensaver on or something, and like just make sure the computer doesn't go to sleep, because it's going to be cranking out these images. And it'll take a while, right? So to calculate out what is going to happen with those images, right? Because I want to make sure you have enough time for whatever deadline you're trying to meet, right? So if let's open up the calculator, right? Boom. Also, make sure it's rendering the correct camera in here when you click that. But say that your scene takes, I mean, this is a low amount, but like, say it takes 50 seconds to render one frame, you know? Then multiply that by the amount of frames in your scene, right? We have 140. So that's 7,000 seconds to render that out. 7,000 seconds. So how many hours is that, right? So divide that by 60, right? So that's 116 minutes. Let's divide that by 60. 1.9 hours, right? So it'd be done rendering in 2 hours. So if your scene takes longer to render out a single frame, like a minute or in 40, then factor that into your render time, right? Factor that in because this amount is gonna take a long time to render out, guys. And I want to make sure you have time to meet whatever deadline you're up against, right? So if that is not long enough for you, or if that's too long for you, you might want to look into downgrading some of the quality, you know, and then see how long it takes from then. Alrighty, so do that math on your own scene before you start like render sequencing, and you'll be good to go. All right, so I'm gonna wait until this finishes, and then I'll do the Premiere section of this tutorial. All right, thanks for watching, y'all. Alrighty, so it's finished rendering up now, and we'll have all of our images out. If we go to our images folder, we can go to that turntable render folder we set up, and look at that, boom, bunch of images, right? And even if you scroll through, you can see the turntable happening in front of your very eyes. And next up, we go to Premiere, right? And then let's do a new project. And I'm just gonna call it like final render or something, you know. And sure, let's replace that. And there we go. So some things to note is frame rate, right? So first we need to bring in our media, right? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to import. And we're going to go to that images folder, turntable render, left click the first image, the very first one, and then left click this image sequence button. Don't just drag all of these images in here. It's going to be insane. You'll have, hundreds of images in your media folder. Just do one image sequence and do open. There you go. And see this right here, that frame rate? It defaults to 30 frames per second, right? We have, however, animated in 24 frames per second, right? So what we need to do is modify interpret footage, and then assume this frame rate, assume 24 FPS, and do okay. There you go. And then you just left click, drag that into your sequence, and then you have a turn. And note that this looks really choppy because I downgraded all of my render settings. Remember, don't do that last part where I downgraded all of them. That was just for this tutorial, so it would render in a timely fashion. And then also think about it, right? If since I want if I want more time on this, right, I can just copy and paste some more of those into that timeline on the sequence. And as it plays, watch, you'll see, boom, it loops perfectly because we didn't move the camera, and then it goes from 0 to 360. So it does a one complete turn, and then you just loop that footage, and it'll look cool. Very dope. All right. So that is how we do that. And then for the class specifically, put in your first ZBrush head doing that, like the same turntable. You don't have to set up the material the same way. You can just apply any sort of material you want and just change those channels in Maya. And render out your animation the same way, right? And then finally, put a title card in front of your work. You always want to put a title card in front. To show that real quick, I'm going to right-click, New Item, make a black video, do OK. And then that black video, you can just slap it in here. I'm going to put my turntable render over the top of that. And then you can search for effects. You can just type in text, and there should be a simple text in there somewhere. And then if you left-click on that, you can look at your effects controls on that video. You'll see that there's that simple text effect on there. That's what that little effects means. And then you can change the position of that. So, boom, let's put that in the middle. Let's edit text and then put like my name. Computer animation 1. There you go. And then you can put the professor's name as well, and there you go. If you want it to sort of fade in nicely, you could turn on opacity, and oh wait, sorry, not there. You want to do this opacity right here. So you see that? So you can put it at 0 at frame 1, and do this little clock, which means that it's going to be an animated property, and then you could do 100% at this frame. So now, there you go. And then, boom. Only keep it for a couple frames. You don't want to do a bunch, right? People are gonna get bored looking at your name for so long, right? So, and then let's move this forward. And then, if you wanted this to fade in, this first king clip, you could do the same thing. Click that little clock for opacity. Dial it down to 0. Go forward a few frames, and then dial that back to 100. Boom. So now, name fades in, and then video fades in. Very cool. All right. Thanks for watching, y'all. That is my little tutorial for this stuff. All right. Have a good one.